The question on many people's minds during this coronavirus pandemic is if there's enough personal protection supplies. The U.S. recently blocked shipments to Canada for a time, and they're apparently not the first country to do so. To talk more about this and other top stories is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, who's a columnist, journalist with the Toronto Sun. Now, Brian, what can you tell me about national supplies of personal protective equipment?
Well, they really vary depending on where you live. Everything from Alberta saying they have a month's worth of supply of the all important N95 mask to Ontario being down to a week's supply. Premier Ford was saying on Monday, that was before the Americans lifted their ban on Canada getting imports and so on. Quebec was calling around the week before asking Ontario, do you have any extra masks? And in that case, it was Ontario Premier Doug Ford telling Premier Legault, I don't have any that I can give you, but here's a company that hooked us up with a lot of masks. They may have more supply for you. They were able to get some, and Legault, publicly praised and thanked Ford for that assistance. So it really depends on how hard hit your area is and how well prepared your provincial government or local health authority was when it comes to ensuring that we have enough PPE. Unfortunately, we just haven't been making much of this stuff here. That may change soon or is already changing, but we haven't been making it. And since January 24th, that was the first export ban. There's a professor in Switzerland who's tracking all the export bans related to COVID-19. And it started with China on January 24th saying no exporting of masks or materials to make masks. And of course, the United States brought in similar restrictions recently as well.
And apparently Ontario is making some of these masks. Are they N95 type of masks? And what are the other examples that are out there?
So Ontario, Premier Ford early on said, look, we're the manufacturing center for Canada. We've got more manufacturing than anybody else. We've got to have companies out there that can change what they're doing now. They can retool and give us something different. And a lot of companies stepped up. The early ones were hand sanitizer. I mean, it's very easy for distilleries, and in a couple of cases, breweries, stepped up and said, we can make hand sanitizer. And we've seen this across the country where small craft distillers and even some of the big ones have said, here you go. You've got one of our lines, or you've got all of our production. And it may not be the best smelling hand sanitizer, but it's getting the job done because, but depending on the hand sanitizer, it's between 60 and 75% alcohol, which kills off the germs.
And don't drink it. Don't drink it.
You don't want to drink this stuff. It's not going to taste good. It's not going to, sit well in your stomach. But they've been putting it out. Some of them even putting it in the cans that they use for their product or their regular liquor bottles, and just with a different label. So that was early on. But as we started to run short of N95 masks, which are the hottest commodity in the world right now, a company out of Mississauga, and they've got factories, 67 factories around the world, a number of them in the southern Ontario area, they stepped forward and said, we can make an N95 type mask. It's called the Woodbridge Group. They normally make a lot of their material is foam for the car seats that you sit on. There's a good chance they may have made your car seat, Hal. And they said, we can adjust our production and make these. So they got approval this past weekend from Health Canada for what's called a level 3 mask. Now they're waiting on a lab in Utah with the, let me try and get this straight. It's an American outfit under the CDC. It's called the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They're the ones that give the N designation. That's the only place that you can get this. So, or at least in North America. So they've sent it there. Once it gets that designation, it can be used by anyone. They'll start off at about 1 million masks a week, go up to 4 million, and that can supply a good chunk of the country once that they get fully up to production. We're also looking at companies making ventilators. The Prime Minister talking about this just the other day, saying that this is important. 30,000 ventilators ordered by the federal government. Provinces are ordering more as well. They're trying to find low-cost ones. They're trying to find redeployed materials. Stanfields. You ever worn Stanfield, Hal? The old underwear from Nova Scotia? They're making gowns now from material that's often used for house wrap. So the same material can be repurposed and made into hospital gowns. So all of that is going on, and it's happening in little pockets across the country. The federal minister in charge of innovation and technology, Navdeep Bain, said the government's policy is buy, and make. So if they can't buy it, they're trying to find a way to make it. And there's a lot of coordination and cooperation among the various governments.
Now, Brian, you've also been writing about the fact that our National Emergency Strategic Stockpile appears to be MIA, missing in action. What did you find out?
Yeah, we shouldn't be in the position that we have been in for the past couple of weeks, because we are supposed to have what's called the NESS, the NESS, or National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. And this is supposed to be handled by the Public Health Agency of Canada. So I started to hear that it wasn't quite where it should be late last week. Looked into it then, looked into it over the weekend, did some interviews, a lot of research on publicly available documents, and this is supposed to be one of the core functions of the Public Health Agency. They're supposed to stock this. The emergency stockpile consists of one central warehouse in the Ottawa area and then 10 regional warehouses across the country so that provinces can draw down on it. This was something handed to the Public Health Agency in 2004 after SARS. They said, we need to be ready for a pandemic. So in addition to the antivirals you already have, you need to stock personal protective equipment, the face shields, the gloves, the gowns, the face masks. They didn't do it. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, that's because they sent it all to China. Look, we sent 51,000 masks to China, and that's bad. But we only sent 1,100 masks. That's the number that I was given. So we did not lose our entire mask supply to that. They obviously had a change of heart, but you look at the comparison to H1N1, how we had 9-10 months of H1N1, 40,000 cases, 420 deaths, 8,000 people hospitalized. And hospital workers were told to gear up in the same way with the masks, with the gloves, with the gowns. And we didn't run out. Provinces drew down on it, but they never ran out. And in this case, we ran out before we were at 2,000 cases of COVID-19. That is a serious problem that we're going to have to look into after this is all over.
So what are medical officials specifically saying now about Canadians wearing masks in public? It seems as though the advice may have changed a little.
And it's extremely frustrating because, people like me that go into, well, when we used to be allowed to go in, I would go into the news conferences and you'd be told one thing. And now we're being told another thing, specifically when it comes to masks, that previously we're told, oh, you shouldn't wear them. They don't really help. I mean, I quizzed the Ontario's chief medical officer about this. I was on calls with Dr. Tam, the federal medical officer, and they said, oh, no, yeah, I know it's a cultural practice somewhere, primarily Chinese, but, you don't have to do that. It's not going to help. In fact, it can make things worse because you don't wear the mask properly, you touch your face, you adjust. It's not going to have any effort. Now they're saying, yeah, they can work. And by the way, don't use a surgical one, so maybe make one at home. This is a real problem, and it's been exposed in some documents that have just been released, of ever-changing advice from the health officials, from the politicians. They've seem to have been caught flat-footed and have been reacting instead of directing.
Brian, the emergency relief benefit known as CERB, C-E-R-B, is now open, and there is a fairly high demand right now, understandably so.
788,000 people applied in the very first day, and those numbers are going to keep going up throughout the week. So, this benefit should have been available a while ago. It wasn't. It took them a while to set up the system. The good news is if you do apply, this is the benefit. If you don't qualify for EI, you can get $500 a week, $2,000 a month for up to 16 weeks. We'll see if that has to be extended. Let's hope not, but they may have to. And these are for people that, maybe you didn't have enough hours in, or your job doesn't fit the description that EI covers. EI can be fairly restrictive at times. So they said on Monday, if you were born between January and the end of March, apply on that day. Tuesday, you were supposed to apply if you were April to June, and so on and so forth. And everyone should apply by Thursday, and then the money will be out the door in 3 to 5 days. But yes, 788,000, almost 800,000 people, and the numbers just keep going up.
Wow. Parliament is back to ensure that new relief measures, including the wage subsidy for businesses, is about to start. Explain to our viewers how that works.
So this is all because when they had the last emergency session, they passed legislation that didn't quite fit the bill, that didn't quite work. If you remember, at that point, they had said, oh, we don't need 75% wage subsidies, we need 10% wage subsidies. And then they were saying that, I guess it would have been 2 Wednesdays ago, the finance minister was before the Senate, before they voted, explaining why they didn't need to go higher than 10%. And then 2 days later, they said, oh, we're going to 75%. And they were about to announce it and announce all the details. And then they said, well, wait a minute. The legislation we just passed doesn't allow us to give 75%. And it requires employers to kick in even more. So they couldn't do it. So they've had to recall Parliament. It's delayed things longer than it should have. This is supposed to be there, the big relief for small businesses. It's a good idea. It's just had some bad planning and some bad execution. And I get that these are bureaucrats that normally take years to develop policy, and they're developing them in a week. I get all that, but there were still problems. And so the original legislation didn't allow it to happen. 2 weeks later, they're trying to pass it. They'll try to get it through. I'm sure will pass. The other parties have said they'll support it, at least in principle. And let's see where the details are. The good idea about this is it tries to keep you attached to your job. And it helps the employer stay afloat, and it helps you stay employed and able to pay your bills.
In early January, the federal government said that the novel coronavirus was being actively monitored with no confirmed cases in Canada. But Brian, by mid-March, the government had repatriated citizens, assessed the national stockpile of supplies, and said that 70% of the country could potentially contract the disease. Things changed in a hurry.
They really did. And there's some, these are from newly released documents that the Health Committee demanded back in March. They said, you've got to give us this. It's called a production order, and it's the right of members of Parliament to say to the government, you show us the papers. You show us what was behind your decision making. Now, they've been released, and they're heavily redacted. That's the fancy term for they took a black marker and they blocked out a lot of stuff. But it still shows a government not knowing exactly what they were up against. And it's not like there weren't warning signs there. We're going to have to take time I think it's 10,000 pages. We're going to have to take time to go through more of what's in there. But we should have been more active on this in January. And instead, what we were told by the health officials and by the politicians is there's a low risk. We don't have to worry about it. No, we don't have to take those steps. No, we don't need to do that. No, we don't need to do this. And now our society is in basically a lockdown. Our economy is in tatters, and people are wondering, okay, we talk about the economy, Hal, and that's an ephemeral term. People don't know how they're going to feed their families. People don't know how they're going to pay rent or mortgage. That's the economy. And all of this because we didn't take this seriously enough at the beginning. There were steps we could have taken early on. We didn't take them, and now we're paying the price.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says donations of medical supplies from foreign companies to combat the COVID-19 pandemic will not change how the government views those companies moving forward. Brian, that includes a recent donation from China, which is trying to have Huawei involved in the 5G network here in Canada.
Yeah, Chinese companies like Alibaba, which is, I guess, their version of Amazon, they've donated, but Alibaba is not trying to lobby the government for special treatment here. But Huawei is. They want into the 5G network. Our military has said it's a bad idea. Our allies have said it's a bad idea. There are real security concerns around this. And so Huawei being part of a donation like this leads a lot of people to say, are they trying to unduly influence the government? Some people said that the federal government should just reject the masks. I don't agree with that. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked about this the other day. I thought he had a good response. He said, we're not going to reject the masks. We're going to look at them, test them, make sure that they're up to Canadian standards. And that's a good idea because we've seen some of these donations from China to other countries not be up to standard. So that's good. And if they're up to standard, then take them, use them. But he said, in no way will this change the government's view when it comes to Huawei. I think they're ready, or at least we're ready, to let Huawei in. I'm against that. But as long as it doesn't change their decision making, then I see no problem going forward with taking the donations.
Toronto Sun journalist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.